Right, 13 minutes now after 10 o'clock. Let's find out what AfriForum and Solidarity told the senior officials in the White House yesterday. We joined on the line by Connie Mulder, who is the head of Solidarity Research Institute. Connie, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement. Nice to be here again.
What was the purpose of this meeting between AfriForum, Solidarity, and the Trump administration? How were you received by the White House?
Clement, I think the purpose of this meeting is twofold. The first is that there is a deep diplomatic crisis between the South African government and the U.S. government, and this being our second largest trade partner means that something needs to be done drastically. So the first purpose of this meeting is to plead for the U.S. government to not punish the country. Please don't sanction South Africa. Don't kick us out of AGOA for their unhappiness with foreign policy that was largely driven by the ANC. So we've once again reiterated the message that says we love our country, we don't like the government a lot, and that means don't punish the country for the international policy positions taken by the ANC government, much rather focus on the actual culprits there. And the second goal would be, President Trump explicitly mentioned Afrikaners in his executive order, and Solidarity movement being the largest organized Afrikaner institution in South Africa with about 600,000 monthly paying members. It just makes sense to go and tell him who we are, what we're doing, and then make acquaintances, but also state what would we require in the form of help for us to stay here, because that's the part that has been quite clear is we really want to stay and contribute to the country, but for that we would need certain cultural institutions we're building ourselves, and we're not worried about but how can the U.S. possibly at any point try and assist in helping us help our cultural community.
In your discussions with these senior officials in the Trump administration, do you find that they are receptive to engagements with the South African government? Because there are reports in the U.S. that our government, even our ambassador to the U.S., they have been trying to at least have an audience with the Trump administration, and they haven't really succeeded. You seem to have found it easy to have access to these senior officials. What was their impression in as far as their interest to chat to the South African government is concerned?
I think we should be, as ordinary South Africans, extremely worried about our government's complete lack of urgency, as well as diplomatic incompetence, quite frankly put. And the Americans are extremely hostile towards the South African government, and that is, in their own words, due to South Africa basically poking them in the eye for the last 10, 15 years with foreign policy. They're worried about the fact that even though this should be very urgent, South Africa has not even finalized a delegation when you could have already spoken, and that means they're increasingly seeing South Africa as a hostile country and one that is not aligned with their national interests. And we're trying to tell them, no, it's not South Africa, it's specifically ANC foreign policy that you're seeing as hostile. But your ordinary South African really does not deserve to be punished for the folly of the ANC in several of these forays. So in that aspect, I think the South African government should move with much bigger urgency, but also should understand from the American state point of view, it's not a simple diplomatic misunderstanding or misinformation. They've got 10 plus more than a decade of consistent actions that are hostile towards the U.S. by the South African government, and that has led to the massive breach in trust that we see now.
I want to ask about, one of the things that you have done as AfriForum is to, and specifically now with Donald Trump, is to again stress how persecuted the Afrikaner community is. I don't know if you saw the SAPS statistics recently. You've been pushing this narrative as AfriForum that there is a serious crisis in as far as white farmers are concerned. The SAPS released their statistics on farm killings. Police recorded 12 farm murders between October and December 2024. 5 of the victims were farm dwellers, 4 were employees, and 1 was a farmer. Why do you still continue with this narrative that seems to suggest white farmers are somehow under siege and persecuted, when in fact, when you look at farm killings and what the statistics say, they don't speak to what you say?
So firstly, Clement, we are querying the statistics for the simple reason we keep our own statistics of bodies on farms, and there's quite a significant difference between what the police has reported and what our own safety structures on the ground has reported, which is worrying in itself. Farm murders have always been a highly politicized statistic, with the police not even publicizing it for several years, and are only starting but making several errors every now and then. What is important, however, is I don't think we've stated persecution or genocide or anything in those lines. What we're asking, and we ask the US government as well to put pressure on the South African government, is simply to declare this a priority crime. The reason we're asking that is South Africa has a murder problem. We've got a violent crime problem. But you need to go and focus on where it's excessively done. And there are three main groups. The first is we've got a massive problem with political killings. If you're a councillor in Natal, you're going to be murdered at a much higher rate than the average population. And the police have responded with priority crime. They've done commissions, etc., to try and solve that problem. The second priority crime is cash in transit, which is, we have a problem with people robbing cash in transit vans. It's a crime that happens at a greater frequency per capita than other would, and that has been declared a priority crime. And then you have the reality of our farmers are being killed at a higher rate than the average South African. That doesn't mean there are there are millions of farm murders. It just means that your chances of being murdered as a farmer are higher, especially in the northeast of the country. And we're saying, but let's handle this like a priority crime like the others, and the government's response has thus far been this problem does not exist. And that is something that is massively deflating, and it creates an enormous sense of mistrust. We're trying to address the problem, and you've got a government that just consistently denies it. And that's why we're still arguing about the statistics, but let's hope we can get that to a priority crime and get more farmers not murdered.
Connie, what do your statistics say? Because I bet you for every farmer that is killed in a quarter or in a week, you cannot even begin to compare that to, let's say, people that are killed in one of the gang-infested areas in the Western Cape. We've seen that in the States in the past, that even children, women and children, I interviewed the police minister last night on my show on the SABC, women and children, that's actually what needs to be a priority. And that is what government is trying to do to respond to. That is a crisis that we have. And there are people listening to you now and thinking, okay, tell us what your statistics say. Because if you're going to tell us that, well, there are more farmers that are killed than ordinary South Africans, than women, than children, then at least you've got an argument to make in that that's supposed to somehow be prioritized, and you need some kind of resources to, which, by the way, there is a task team in the police that deals with farm attacks, not just white farmers or farm attacks, including farm dwellers, including farm employees. But what do your statistics say that seem to suggest that it's the farmers really that are mostly killed in this country, more than any other population or groups?
Well, firstly, we didn't say more than any other population group. We're saying much more than the average. And the statistics are, it's roughly, I think South Africa's average murder rate is around about 30 to 40 per 100,000. And if you're a farmer in South Africa, it's over 100 per 100,000. You've got estimates varying, but it's between 100 to 300, depending on the year. So in absolute numbers, no, there won't be more murders than other populations, for the simple reason there aren't more farmers than other populations. But when you look at the rate per 100,000, it is significantly higher, even than the police force's murder rate. And that is statistics that we're referencing. So the answer to that would be, okay, there's a population that is being disproportionately focused. We're not saying white farmers, do note, you said that, I didn't say that. It's farmers. What is weird, however, is in 2003 there was a commission that was appointed for farm murders, and it found out that a farmer is 6 times more likely to die in a farm attack than a cash in transit guard is in a cash in transit robbery, which says something is off. Why the extreme
cruelty? And there is a reason for that, right? Well, there's a reason for that. It's because these farms are in far-flung areas. They're far from police officers, and there's a reason why criminals actually target farmers and farm workers, is because it takes time for them to even report that for the police to come, and response times are very long. So they take advantage of that. And
but then we have to ask the question: why would you disband the rural safety structures that had much faster response times. So we feel for the police. We've heard how many reports of police vans getting lost on farm roads en route to a farm, and that's why we've started setting up local safety structures, especially with rural safety. What is weird, however, is we've got several examples of extreme cruelty in these attacks, which doesn't make sense. Why would you execute a 2-year-old in these attacks? And from there we're saying there's something off. What we're asking is plain and simple, if you've got a population that's disproportionately focused by crime, like gang violence, you're 100% correct, that's one of the other priority crime areas, then we need a disproportionate response to this, to say, but then this is a population that needs extra protection from the police, as it is with women and children. I don't think we've ever said we need to have only one priority. There's no way, but what we're saying is you've got a population that is just disproportionately being focused on in rural safety at least, and the response that we're expecting is some form of priority crime. The response we're getting is denial. It's saying if this does not happen, we're making it up.
That's not true, Connie. There's no denial. There's no denial. I've interviewed the police commissioner.
There are no farm murders in South Africa. This is the president of the country stating that on international television.
Okay, I'm talking about the police officials now, right? I'm talking about the police officials now also, whose responsibility it is to actually provide security. It's not true that they're denying that. I've interviewed 2 different police commissioners in the past. General Sitola, I've interviewed the one before Sitola as well, who spoke about the need at the time for a task team that looks at not farm attacks but also at rural crime, because that's actually something that people that may not necessarily have a farm but they stay in rural areas, that's the kind of experience that they have in as far as crime is concerned. Farm workers are still killed more than farmers. That's what the police are telling us. Do you focus on that? Do your stats tell you that?
Yes, our stats actually include everyone who's on a farm during a farm attack. So from our perspective, we're working with the police where possible, that is true, but at a political level, unfortunately, there has been very little, from what they can tell, very little will to do anything against this. We're basically just stating, we're focusing on farm attacks specifically, but that's one of the focuses of the US visit. But we're stating, why won't you declare it a priority crime? It is obviously, and this could be rural safety, it should actually include stock theft as well, which is a massive problem on farms in South Africa. And you've got, unfortunately, that is at the political level, and you've got a steadfast refusal to even admit that maybe there might be a disproportionate problem at a political level. The police, we work with the police, and we truly feel for the constables, the good police officers who desperately try and maintain safety, but are simply not getting the political backing and the resources necessary to do this.
Yeah, we've got a crime problem in this country, Connie. We've got a crime problem that affects women, that affects children, that affects farmers, that affects farm workers, that affects any other employee, and all of those people matter. And the SAPS, with the scarce resources that they have, are supposed to respond to really what matters, and that is to all the South Africans that live here that are not safe. That's a crime problem that we have. But to create an impression that there's a particular group in this country that somehow is under siege. And my follow-up question to that is, if really that's how you feel as Solidarity, as AfriForum, why do you then keep on refusing this refugee offer by Donald Trump? Because if you're really not feeling safe here, if you're feeling genuinely that your lives are at risk here, why not take up this offer by Donald Trump?
All right, Clement, let's not strawman one another. We didn't say under siege. We're saying there's a group that is disproportionately focused, and that would require a disproportionate response. That is a very rational position. Regarding refugee status, we spoke about that as well. And the vast majority of Afrikaners are, we were born here, we've been here for more than 300 plus years. That's 3 centuries. And they do not want to leave. We can understand if some people are feeling, well, I see no future, then please go. If you're desperately fearful for your life. But from Solidarity and AfriForum's perspective, our slogan is in Afrikaans, ons sal self, which means we're going to try and build a future for our community here. For that, you need cultural institutions, you need educational institutions, you need safety structures, etc. And that is what we're trying to build, so that we, as a cultural group, can stay in South Africa, the land of our birth, land of my forefathers. I've been here for 13 generations. So we've known no other country, and we've got nowhere else to go, and we don't want to go anywhere else. I don't think we're seeing ourselves as a community as under siege and being murdered every day. There are agent provocateurs on the right of us that tend to promote that narrative. Our narrative has been, this is a priority, it's a disproportionate crime, and it needs to be focused. We're creating our own structures, but we would like some form of political acknowledgement that diverts resources to people being targeted disproportionately. Secondly, we're going to build whatever we want and whatever we need to stay here by ourselves, and that is part of the discussion with the US. Is saying we need certain things, certain institutions, etc., to exist and to survive as a cultural community and hopefully thrive. Which of the number one thing would be economic growth. We desperately need, as a country, economic growth everywhere, and that means starting with saying, please don't sanction the country. Our government has done extremely stupid things internationally, but don't punish the average citizen.
Yeah. Do you understand that the US has done stupid things internationally as well?
Yes, obviously no government is perfect. The US has, however, not decided to get involved in conflicts that have no benefit at all. The second thing is the US is the biggest economy in the world, Clement. We're not.
Oh, so they've got a right. They've got a right to intervene. They've got a right to just go and invade countries. They've got a right to go and involve themselves
if you don't allow me to finish my
in things that don't involve them.
And you're going to finish them for me, then there's very little use of continuing. Let me continue. We're not saying it's right that they're intervening. We're saying that the damage to the country that they're going to take is much, much lower. And unfortunately, in international politics, if you're bigger, you can get away with more. So from South Africa's perspective, this is our second biggest... Right. No, I'm not going to try and defend U.S. foreign policy. I'm telling you...
Yeah, you are, Connie. You are, because you're trying to suggest that because you are some big superpower, then, well, you've got more leeway to act as you will. And I'm suggesting to you that is flawed. If you really are an organization that stands on morality, that stands on what is right, that stands on the human rights, you will be able to look at the US and say, you are also being hypocritical here. But because this suits your political agenda, you are okay with the US interfering elsewhere. But no, South Africa can't have a foreign policy that other countries are going to disagree with, right? But the US can. The US can take whatever decision and foreign policy they want, even
not
though...
At all what I said. All right, Clement, what I'm describing is this is our second biggest trading partner. We're 0.6% of the world's economy. The US is, I think, about 25%. We're not doing a moral authority over everything. We're stating that for South Africa's foreign policy, the goal should be South African interests first. That is what most countries would say their foreign policy goals are. The US's foreign policy goals are explicitly US interests first. Where our government has unfortunately got involved with Russia-Ukraine with very little thought as to how do South African interests benefit from this. They've got involved in the Israel-Palestine spat, in the tragedy that is occurring in the Middle East, but with very little thought for how will this affect average South Africans. And they've poked their eye, the US in the eye for the last 10, 15 years, really almost petty in the way they handled them, with very little thought for how does this affect South Africa and how does this affect South Africans first. And that has now created a diplomatic furor between us and our second largest trading partner. So stating plain facts is, as a country, it is a dangerous game to play to try and alienate your second largest trading partner.
Yeah. So, Connie, let me ask you this. If there was a country where there's a genocide taking place, hypothetical, right? If there's a country where people's human rights are being affected, right? There's a genocide taking place. That country is the country that is perpetrating that genocide is an ally of the US. Are you suggesting that South Africa should shush because they must think about how they are going to be affected, calling out the genocide perpetrated by allies of the US?
Oh, sorry, Clement, are you referring to China, South Sudan, or which country are you?
I'm saying it's hypothetical because it's always going to happen. I said to you in the beginning, I said, this is hypothetical. Let's say there's a country out there, there's a genocide currently unfolding, human rights are violated, South Africa wants to take a position and call that out. But the country that's perpetuating and perpetrating that violence and genocide and human rights abuses is an ally of the US. Are you suggesting that South Africa has got to shush because, oh, we mustn't upset the US because this country that's perpetrating this genocide is a friend of the US?
All right, let's go with your hypothetical. Let's not make it the US, let's make it China, the biggest trading partner for South Africa. And the answer to that is not hypothetical. South Africa is not going to, at any point, do anything against that because China is our largest trading partner. That is the foreign policy that we follow thus far. So I think the main problem would be if we've been consistent in this regard, there would be much more leeway for the positions that South Africa has taken. But we've been very inconsistent. Do remember, in 2015, the South African government smuggled Umar al-Bashir out of the country, who had an ICC warrant out on his name for genocide in the Darfur region of Sudan. So we've not acted consistently or consequently at all in terms of international policy.
But my question, Connie, are you saying that we should keep quiet? Should we keep quiet as South Africa if there was a genocide?
Well, you can condemn it, most likely, but you should start all foreign policy with how does this affect South Africa? And that is the thing that worries me is quite simply put, I don't think our government has put South Africa first in terms of foreign policy thus far. And now there's massive diplomatic error and this crisis, I think America looking at economic sanctions against us, kicking us out of AGOA, etc.
I got you. Yeah, I'm out of time now, but I think we got the point. Thank you so much for making time for us. Connie Mulder is the head of Solidarity Research Institute.